Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon. This is Syed Mazhar, Chair for the IOSH UAE Committee. On behalf of my committee, I welcome you again to this great session. Before we begin, I would like to present my thanks to all of you guys who has registered previously. And indeed, without your confirmation or without your support, we cannot run such events. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart and my committee. Before we begin, I would like to inform you that this session will be recorded. We really appreciate your attendance, and that's why we, IOSH, always give you the certification, which is attendance certificate. But there's a criteria: you need to be in the session, the whole session, or minimum 40 minutes, not less than that. So please make sure that you're there, your name is there, your email address is properly maintained, because I can see some of the people got in from Samsung, iPhone, their name is not there. So make sure your name, your email address is there in order to give you a certificate if you attend the whole event. The event will be recorded. Not to take you much time, today we have a great session, which is chemical safety management system confirmation. And I think it's a unique topic for us, because most of our topics were relevant to health and safety and scaffolding, working at height, heat stress, management system, etc., etc. But I think this is one of the unique, and we are fortunate to have Mr. Dermot Dinan, who is having 20 years experience in the field of health and safety and chemical management system and etc. So I think this will be a very fruitful event, and I would like to request you to please keep your mic muted and give attention. So I would like to invite Mr. Dermot Dinan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to IOSH for having me here today. It's great to be here. As we said there, I'm going to talk about chemical safety systems today. Can you maybe just give me a thumbs up to let me know if you can see my screen there, guys? Yep, you can see it. Cool. Okay. So first of all, just introduce myself. My own name is Dermot Dinan. I was founder of a company called DCM back in 2004. Essentially, we were a company who specialized in chemical safety. We worked in the transport of dangerous goods, we had consultancy, we worked in training. And the main product we had was a product called ChemDoc, which was our managing chemical safety online. We were bought out by Ecoline in 2018, and essentially they were doing the same as us, but in the Nordics. Just about myself personally, and I always have to say this at the start, and to keep, and if you guys could keep this in mind, maybe when you listen to this, but also in the questions you ask as well. And that is, I am not a chemical safety expert. I am a systems person. So there are plenty of people on this call who will know a lot more about chemical safety than me in terms of, should I use this type of glove? Should we use this type of ventilator, etc., etc. That's not my thing. I am a systems person. So my background is as a software engineer. And like what I'm talking about here is, I've been working in the business for about 17 years, but in particular the last 10 years, mainly traveling around the UK, implementing chemical safety management systems. So helping companies implement chemical safety management systems. Obviously, this is something that we said ourselves, which I will talk about briefly at the end. But what I'm going to talk about here is, it doesn't matter if you're using Excel or an Access database or whatever you guys want to use. It's very much based on the mistakes that I've seen companies make. I also have to go front, I don't have a huge amount of experience in the Middle East or in areas like this. But again, a lot of what I'm talking about here is best practice, mainly based on kind of UK legislation. But again, it travels well. And there's different legislation in different territories that say pretty much the same as this. But it's very much about best practice and how to get it right. So it's, as I said, it's very much, it's systems we're talking about today, and how to implement a good chemical safety management system. So I'm just going to do, that's about the company I work for. I'll talk about that briefly at the end. The other thing, just to say, there is a wee chat function there, and we're going to leave at least 10 minutes at the end just for questions. And I'd really strongly encourage you to, any questions at all that pop up as I go through this in terms of systems, pop them into it. we're going to have 10 minutes to go through as many as we can at the end. And even I'll talk to the guys that are organizing it, and I may even come back if we don't get them all done. I may even be able to send on a follow-on email to get on some of the questions we don't get through today. But any questions that you think of, pop them into the chat as you think of them, and we'll go through them then at the end. So what we're going to be looking at today, just very briefly, you can see the 10 points there. It's essentially like this is essentially kind of a 10 steps to chemical safety type presentation. So we're looking at developing our policy, building our inventory, manage our safety strategies, get to know the hazards we have, design a template to risk assess those chemicals, decide who will do it, and then distribute and train based on what you have. So that's essentially the outline of what I'm going to go through today. First one is just develop your chemical safety policy. Essentially what I'm kind of saying here is just to start off with a plan. And again, it's based on mistakes that I've seen over the past, where people will jump in and dive in to start writing a risk assessment or just go get safety. Stand back and look at the full picture. Who is going to be in charge of what areas, and what do we actually want to achieve? So what you don't have to have. You're not going to know everything at the very start, because it's going to come through as you go through it. But to figure out what you're going to achieve, who's going to take responsibility for different areas, etc. So start off developing I would say the skeleton of your chemical safety policy, and it's going to grow as you go through the full process. The second step is build your chemical invention, and this is so critical to chemical safety. It's such a critical step, and it's such a basic step, and it is just so often missed out. No matter what chemical safety system you're using, whether you are using a system, I think there's someone there that's maybe, if you could go on mute there at the minute, there's someone just chatting at the minute.
Hello, excuse me, everyone. Please keep your mic mute, please, in order to avoid any interruption. Thank you very much. Dermot, please go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. So, as I said, if you don't have an accurate list of the chemicals that you have, then everything else down the road won't work. And I see so many people saying things like, well, I know these 10 chemicals over here are particularly hazardous, so let's start with those. The problem with that is that if you know those 10 chemicals are particularly hazardous, and maybe you have large quantities of them, then the chances are that everyone else knows they're hazardous and they're treating them accordingly. It doesn't mean that it's perfect, but they're treating them accordingly. And I'd be much more concerned about the 10, 20 things over here that nobody knows anything about. We don't know are they hazardous, we don't know. So the first thing you need to do is just get a list of every single thing you have. And the first step in that here, you can see here I've said list out all departments of site regardless of chemical use. Again, it's a little mistake I see made, that people presume they know where the chemicals are. So they start off on the point to say, well, okay, you know what? I'm the health and safety manager, or I'm the operations manager. So I want to get a list of chemicals. So we have chemicals in the paint shop, and we have chemicals in engineering, and we have chemicals in maintenance. So I'm going to go to those people. And there's maybe 5 or 6 other departments, and I'm presuming to know there's no chemicals there. And I would say, no, you list out all your departments, your physical areas, and you reach out to somebody in those areas, and you put someone in charge and say, okay, what chemicals have you got? And if they've got none, great, but get someone from that department to confirm that for you. So you list out your structure, you have your sites, your departments, etc. Ideally, you want to get at least one person in each of those nodes. So if I say I have a site and I have a department here, you want to get somebody in that department responsible for just tell me what chemicals you have. If they do nothing else along the way, the minimum you want them to be responsible for is, this is the inventory. This is the list of chemicals in my department. If you as health and safety person are having to go down and create that list for every single department, and I know sometimes in an idealistic world, I know sometimes you just can't get that buy-in from people to do it, but really you have to get them to do that much. There's loads of other stuff coming on that other people can do that you can do, but you really have to try and push it back on the individual departments and areas themselves to build their own list, and ultimately to keep that up to date. So when you're doing it, when you're reaching out, so we have our departments listed out now, and we have a person in each one. Rather than just reaching out to them and saying, can you send me on a list of products in your area? Create just a little template for them, because what will happen is one person will create an Excel file with 7 or 8 different columns on it, and they'll give you product name, manufacturer, CAS number, the amount they have in stock, where they store it, and there'll probably be more information than you need. And then the next person will just draw out a list in a bit of paper and fax it over to you, and you'll get everything in between. And you're then going to waste so much time trying to pull all that together. Get a nice simple template, use an Excel or something like that that you guys use, and just say, and the main information you need, think of the information that you're going to need in order to do the next step, which is get the safe data sheet. That is, you need the full product name, you need the manufacturer, which is preferable to the supplier, which I'll get to in a minute. And finally, for specialist type chemicals, especially laboratory type chemicals, you need a product code as well. So what is the manufacturer's product code for that, for those kind of chemicals? CAS number, hazards, etc. You don't need those now, because we're going to get those off the safe data sheet. So I would say you create a nice simple template, manufacturer name, product name, and maybe product code if it's available. And that's what you give to your people. You give that to each people in the department, say, can you fill that in for your department? So then when you get it back, all the information is going to be in the same format. So we have a list now of the chemicals that we have on our site. And I would say pull that together centrally. It's you don't just want to keep in their own department. Yes, you want them to manage it in their own departments, but pull that information back in centrally. So the next step then is we need to get our safe data sheets. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide in terms of what is a safe data sheet. I think most people on this call will know what it is. Look, it's a critical document. It's your primary source of chemical safety information. It's a unique document to every product by every manufacturer. And that's very important. If you have product A made by manufacturer B, then that's the safe data sheet you have to have, not a safe data sheet from a different manufacturer, not a safe data sheet for a different product. You have to have the safe data sheet for the product and the manufacturer that you have. And safe data sheets, they need to be available where chemicals are in use. So you have to get the safe data sheets for the chemicals that you have on site, and you need to make them available where the chemicals are actually in use. And I actually, the electronic or hard copy, I'll come back to that in a second, because when I talk about distribution. So look, we may talk again about safe data sheets. I could give a whole hour or two just on safe data sheets alone. Again, we're talking very much about systems here, and part of the service that we provide in EcoOnline is we manage safe data sheets for you. Because of that, and because we've done that for a long time, we know how much of a pain it is, and we've seen a lot of the, I suppose, a lot of the issues that you can have with sourcing safe data sheets. In an ideal world, again, you can see the first point there. The safe data sheet should be got before the product is even bought on site. And again, if you're not doing that right now, it's a goal that you work towards that, because if you're buying something and it is a carcinogen, it's really too late to find out that it's carcinogen 2 or 3 months after we have it on site. Ideally, we need to get that safe data sheet in now and say, we're looking at using this next month. We see it's a carcinogen and we make a decision either not to use it, or we put appropriate controls in place. But when it comes to just, again, the practical side of actually sourcing and managing your safe data sheets, the first thing I'd say is, even though we get individual departments to build their inventory, I would say do the sourcing of the safe data sheet centrally, because otherwise there's going to be a huge duplication of work happening. And you'll have the obvious duplication of where my department and another department are both using the same product and we both source the same safe data sheet. That's an obvious duplication. But most of the work in sourcing safe data sheets is actually contacting the manufacturer and finding, where do I get safe data sheets from this manufacturer? So once I get safe data sheets from a manufacturer, it's as easy to get 10 as it is to get 1. Once I have the right contact or the right website with the right login, etc. So even though myself and this department may be using different products, but if they're coming from the same manufacturer, we're duplicating the work by both of us finding that out. So I would say, and if you are delegating then, so if we say that me and two of my colleagues are going to source all the safe data sheets, instead of us doing it where you do that department and you do that department, we pull all the department information together, and I say, okay, you do manufacturers from A to G, you do the next batch of manufacturers, and I do the next batch. So you do them by manufacturer, so you're not duplicating work in there. And that's another critical point is, if at all possible, you source a safe data sheet directly from the manufacturer, from the person that actually made the product, because that's going to be the best source for the most up-to-date safe data sheet you can get. So if I'm a supplier of a product and I'm a wholesaler and I buy it here and I sell it on to you, I may get the safe data sheet from the manufacturer today, but I may not go back to the manufacturer for another 2 or 3 years and check, is there a new one available? And I just keep giving this one out. Whereas the only way to make sure that you absolutely have the latest version is you go direct to the manufacturer. Now, obviously, whoever you're buying your chemicals from, they have an obligation to supply you with the safe data sheets. But you as an employer, you have an obligation to make sure that they're there. So I suppose I sometimes hear it kind of brushed off that, well, the supplier didn't give me a safe data sheet. Yes, the supplier is wrong, but you as an employer, you need to protect your staff. So if the supplier isn't giving it to you, you need to find a different supplier, or you need to go over their head and go to the manufacturer, but you need to do all you can to get that safe data sheet there. So, and when you get your safe data sheet, I kind of touch on this in the next slide anyway, but again, when you get your safe data sheet in, record some basic information. The two main things that I'd record is, okay, revision date of the safe data sheet, when you got it, but also record very basically where you got it from. Because again, going back to my point a couple of minutes ago, some of the biggest work in sourcing safe data sheets is finding out, where do I get it for this manufacturer? So when you have to go, or maybe somebody else in your organization has to go in 6 months' time and update that SDS or get a new SDS from the same manufacturer, they don't have to figure all that out again, because you recorded when you source this one, you recorded, this is where I got it from. So as I said, they're just a couple of tips that we've learned from. So we have sourced hundreds of thousands of safe data sheets in Ecoline because as part of our service over the years. And they're just a couple of tips that we've learned from that. Another small little one I'd say, and it's not even on this slide. Whatever system, again, if you're not going to a company like us to do it for you, whatever system you're using to source safe data sheets, build it in a way that you're going to consider the fact that you're going to have to contact manufacturers more than once. Because what will happen is, so let's say you have 100 products. You reach out to the manufacturer first time round, or you Google them, you go on their website, etc. And you're going to get the first, and I'm kind of making up numbers here, but you're going to get the first 60 to, let's say 60% of them very easy. The first 60% of safe data, you will get them very easy. You'll have a manufacturer, will have a good website, or you'll have a contact and they'll email everything onto you. And that's great. But the other 40% then, you're going to maybe have to phone them, leave a message, contact them again in a week's time. They promise to get back to you. Contact them again a week after that. So whatever system you're using, just know from the start that you're going to have to contact some of these multiple times. So even if it's just an Excel file, just think about the start. Okay, I put down that I contact them there today. Just leave some space for the second contact, the third contact, the fourth, the fifth, etc. So I know internally we have a five contact process where we contact manufacturers 5 times and escalate it every time. So just keep that in mind. You're going to have to contact some of them more than once, and some of them a lot more than once over time. So we've gone out and we've got our safe data sheets. The next step then, so your safe data sheets are your safe data sheets are your main source of chemical safety information. And that's going back to the point I made at the very start in terms of, don't presume you know where your hazards are. Now we've got all our safe data sheets. Now we can actually find out what our hazards are. What are the hazards we actually have on site? And we're going off the kind of UK COSH model here, where I see a little bit of a mistake happening a lot, particularly in the UK, where there's kind of almost a little bit of an obsession with the COSH assessment, and they can't wait to get the COSH assessment done. And there's a lot you can do before that to make it a lot more efficient and to make some immediate impact in the company. So what I would say is we now have our list of products from our inventory in the second step. We have our safe data sheets. So we've access to a safe data sheet for every one of those. Look at section 2 of all those safe data sheets. So a quick run through and essentially just record what are the hazards of these products. So you're not looking at go into detail, but just to find out, okay, where do I have corrosives, flammables, toxics, etc. So now you can essentially create a snapshot of the hazards you have on site. Before you go into the detailed assessments, you can create a snapshot. So now let's say we have 200 products. They'll all be an Excel file. They may be broken down by department, but we can see then, okay, this is flammable, this is toxic, this is corrosive, etc., etc. So we have a snapshot of what we have. And the two things then I would do with that snapshot, before I move into individual chemical level, the two things I would do with that snapshot is, first of all, fix the big problems. So essentially, what are the big hazards? Where do we have carcinogens, mutants, explosives, etc.? Where do we have those? And are they been looked at properly? And obviously, as you guys would know, going off the hierarchy control, the first thing we're going to ask when we identify those is, should we have them at all? So we have a product here that is a carcinogen. The first thing we say, should we have that at all? Is there a less hazardous alternative we can use, or can we eliminate the process completely? But so that's the first thing. Identify the big hazards, the nasty stuff, and see, are they being controlled properly, or do we have to have them at all? The second step is then look in general by department/area. So as I said, we have our Excel file now, or our system. We can look by area and we can see what the hazards are. So we can go in and we can look at one particular area. So we can look at the engineering department and we can see there's 60 chemicals there. And from those 60 chemicals, there are 20 that are corrosive. And maybe there are 10 that are flammable, and there's no toxics. That's all we have in engineering. And I know that's very simplistic. But before we look at them individually, let's look now at engineering in general and say, well, okay, engineering controls, we have 20 corrosives here in engineering. Have we got sufficient controls in place to deal with those? So do we need to get an IOSH station in? Are the gloves, etc., that we use suitable for corrosives? Similarly, we have 10 we have 10 flammables. Have we got suitable flammable controls in for those? Do we need to upgrade the fire extinguishers, etc.? So basically, fix the main controls in place by department. Another thing to look at possibly at this time, again, I don't have it there, before you're going into your individual assessments, maybe storage and segregation. So again, to get a snapshot, now that we have a snapshot of the hazards, to see, is there anything obvious here? So do I have any explosives besides oxidizers? Is there anything obvious beside each other or in this department that I need to look and see, okay, are these being kept apart or should they be in different departments altogether? So again, just to summarize this slide, what I'm saying here is get a snapshot of your hazards. Before you get into individual ones, get a snapshot of your hazards and see, can you fix the big problems first before we go into the nitty-gritty? So the next thing then is we're going to push on to write risk assessments around this. So I specifically use the term here, chemical risk assessment template. If you're in the UK or if you're familiar with UK regulations, this is your cost assessment. If you're in Ireland, for example, we call it a chemical agent risk assessment. It doesn't really matter because essentially it is the same thing. We need to do a risk assessment of how we use this chemical and see, can we use it any safer? I have a specific step in here essentially for designing the template that you're going to use to write your risk assessments. And again, you're going to hear this over and over again from me. You're already heard it a few times. That's based on mistakes that I've seen. It's based on me seeing so many companies in the UK in particular, where they go out to write a cost assessment, they'll Google cost assessment template, they'll download the first template they get, and they'll start writing a risk assessment without actually looking to see, well, is this relevant to my company? Maybe this is designed for a laboratory and I work in an oil field or vice versa. So design a template that actually works for you and make it more relevant. One of the things you're looking for here, I have an analogy I use kind of when I'm selling our system, but it's true for any template. let's say that I'm the EHS person and I go down to work with one of my staff today, and we're going to write a risk assessment. So based on a chemical that they use, I'm going to go down and work with them. And we could spend 15 minutes assessing the chemical and the risk and the job that they're doing. So we'd look at the safe data sheet, we'd look at the hazards, we'd look at the environment that they're using it in, we'd look at the process, the people exposed, etc. And we'd make some decisions. We decide, okay, the PPE you're using is okay. Maybe we need to get a fume hood in there, etc. And we'll make some decisions. And that's 15 minutes well spent, or 20 minutes or half an hour, whatever it is. That's time well spent. The problem is then that me and this other person, between us, one of us has to go and write that up. And we could spend 2 or 3 hours writing it up. And that's the bit that we're looking to make more efficient, because that's the time sink. Can you make it more efficient to fill out that information and make it more efficient to guide people through that? So what I'm saying here is, if you're designing a template for your company, a couple of points on it. And again, as I said, I base this on COSH initially, but this is relevant worldwide, because it is, I want to write a risk assessment of how I use it. First of all, keep it simple and keep it relevant. And I've seen this so many times. The more complex you make your COSH template, the more guaranteed it is to fail, or your chemical risk assessment, or any risk assessment template. The more complex you make it, the more guaranteed it is to fail. Make it, it's not that you have to make it, simple and useless, but make it, cut out what's not relevant to your company. Use as much multiple choice as possible, but not generic rubbish. So the example I always use there is spill control. If a spill happens on one of your sites, there's only a limited number of things that people can do. So rather than leaving spill as free text in your template, actually sit down with your team and say, well, okay, what are our options for spill? Use the spill kits in the blue wheelie bin, use the sand in car park A, etc. And you build that on, put that onto your template. So when somebody goes to write an assessment, they can pick, you're not putting them into every assessment, you put it onto your template, so like in a drop down or a checkbox, and they can pick from every one of those. So they can pick from the controls that are actually available in your company, as opposed to putting in generic copy and paste stuff off an SDS or something like that. And you see I've said there about, free text. There's some cases you have to have it, but it encourages copy and paste of generic stuff in an SDS, and it slows down the whole process. And that's why I'm saying, where you have controls on your site, pre-populate the assessment template with those. And again, I'm not saying every template, every assessment looks the same. You're putting a control in, like a drop down, with what's available on your site. So in our fire controls, what are our options on site? Put in drop downs with your options on site. And I'm picking from the actual options available in my company. Take a little bit of time to do that. But if you imagine you've 100, 200, 300 chemicals, if you can save a half an hour in every assessment that you have to do, straight away, you could have saved 50, 100, 200 hours. And it's, apart from saving the time, you're making it much easier for yourself to get other people involved, because it doesn't look as scary. It doesn't look as time consuming. You've essentially put in a tool that'll handhold them through it. A very small little thing that we have there is just put your own brand logo on the template. So mycompany.com, put that on the template. It highlights ownership of it, that this is an internal document. And also there's always a huge amount of confusion between chemical risk assessments and safe data sheets among staff. And it helps to show it, okay, the one with our company logo, that's the risk assessment. Manufacturer ones, they're the safe data sheet. It's only a small thing, but we definitely find it helps. Just a couple of key elements of your risk assessment template. And again, this is just based on our own consultants over the years, and just a couple of best practice points. You have to have a description of the process, identify who are the people involved, and importantly, who are the people exposed. So if I'm doing a job here at my desk, and maybe I'm welding here at my desk, yes, I'm involved. But if there's 2 or 3 other guys and girls over there, the other side of the room, well, they're also exposed to what I'm doing, and they need to be taken into account. Identify the quantities used, the length of the process, how often you do it, etc. Obviously, what are the hazards? So what are the hazards of the chemical? How can it cause harm? And are there any third-party hazards? So like a welding rod isn't a hazardous chemical on its own. But when you use it, it creates a hazardous third party, and you need to record that. What are the current controls in place? So what are we currently doing? Not what we like to do, what are we currently doing right now? What's actually in place? The risk rating is one that divides people. There is no, like everything I've gone through here, there is no absolutely must have or absolutely must not have. But again, I know our own consultants are a big fan of having some kind of a scoring system at the end to say, this is a, red, orange, green, low, medium, high, 1 to 25, a way of just kind of scoring how dangerous this process is. It's relevant to all risk assessments, and I know our own consultants would also have it in chemical risk assessments because they feel it's a good fit. And the last one, and again, it's based on me seeing this in so many templates where it's missing, and it's so critical. It is, your template needs to have an area where you're going to record, are we going to make any improvements? So it is, what do we do right now? And are there any improvements to be made? And if there are, what are they? Who's going to do them, etc. So again, I see a lot of templates where it is just documenting what do we do right now. But that's not enough. The whole idea of doing an assessment is we're looking to see, do we need to improve it? And in some cases we don't. We've looked at it, we improved it last year, we bought a better glove, we're happy, all the chaps are trained. Any need for improvements? No, there isn't. But have that space in your template to record. So we've designed a template, just trying to keep an eye, we've designed a template. Who's going to write them? Okay, look, this is very simple. The main point I'm trying to make on this slide here is that you need two things to write a chemical risk assessment. You need to be aware of chemical safety, regulations, practicalities, but also you need to know the process, and you need to know the process well. So the ideal mix to write an assessment is that you have your EHS person involved and you have your people on the ground involved. And the first 2 points there are basically saying that either one of them on their own is not ideal for doing it. The second 2 points is where basically we actually go down and we work with them and we do it together. Or the last point is trying to say, okay, they do it, but they handed it back to us, the EHS specialist, for sign off. They're the kind of two options we're looking at. But an EHS person who's not on the ground every day working the process, they're not involved enough in the process to write it in an ideal world. And the staff themselves, even if they maybe had some training, they're not qualified enough because they're not doing it every day. They're not qualified enough to sign off on it. Ideally, it's a mix of those two that would write the assessments. So we've now gone and we have built our inventory. So we know these are the 200 chemicals that we have. We have sources, safe data sheets for those. We have a list of these are the hazards that we have. We know what we have in hazards by location. We've designed a template. We've pushed on now and we've written our chemical risk assessments. And at this point, like we're obviously in a really good area. We need to make all that available to our staff. It's not good enough to have that available just on the EHS manager's laptop or just in the health and safety office. Everyone who's using the chemicals, etc., they need to have access to this information. So in an ideal world, as much as possible, we use soft copies, i.e. you give them some kind of a system, so like the chemical manager system that Eco9 provide, or maybe it's just to a network folder or something like that, but they have access from there to the latest soft copy. One thing you'll have to keep in mind with soft copies, ideally, it's through some kind of a document management system. So essentially that they're only getting the latest version, that you can roll out newer versions to them. And in an ideal world, you can actually maybe even get a sign off from them to say that they've read it and understood it, etc. in an ideal world. The other thing you consider with soft copies, and again, I'm sure we have a real mix of people here and industries, is that are your people working in remote areas where they may not have access to the internet? So with the soft copy, then you're going to have some kind of a way, and again, the chemical manager app will do it for you, that you'll have them available on your device even when you don't have internet access. Hard copies, you try and stay away from using hard copies as much as possible. The second you print out a hard copy, it'll start to go out of date. But there is no getting away from the fact that there's going to be some areas in some organizations where they just don't have access to technology, Maybe it's because of the staff that are there. Maybe it's because you're not allowed to bring your phone device into this area. And in that case, you're going to have to put in hard copies. What I would say with that is two things. First of all, if we have maybe one department of the company over here that they don't have access in that area to technology, and so therefore they have to have hard copies. But I say by hard copies, printed copies. Well, then we only print out what's needed in that department. We don't print out all 400 safe dashes of the company and stuck in a big massive folder. Print out what's just needed in that department and make it available to them. And you have to put procedures in place. You have to put something in place so that if any of these SDSs get updated or any assessments get updated, that there's something in place that's going to, somebody knows they have to go out and update that folder accordingly. But only print what you absolutely have to. But also you can't avoid in some cases that there are areas that you will have to do it. You can't just pretend, okay, they can go across the site. If you need it in that area, you're going to have to print it out. Again, we're getting to the point here where we're in a really good area. We've gone now. We know what the hazards are. We've come to some conclusions about how we're going to manage those hazards in our company, and train the staff basically on what we've done. It is, and it's a mix of two things. So first of all, your general chemical safety training. So again, it can be called different things: chemical safety, chemical awareness, etc. That may be half of just and that's almost the same worldwide in terms of your general chemical awareness. What are my hazards? How to recognize the hazards? How to read a label, etc. So that's general, but it's very, very important that you also have a local element to it as well. Okay, so we do start general chemical awareness training. That's fine. Okay, the second half then is we've just completed our risk assessments here in my food manufacturing company. These are the chemicals we have. These are the conclusions that we've come to. We said, okay, we don't have any flammables, we don't have any toxics, but we have a lot of corrosives. And this is what we do about corrosives. And these are the controls we have here in our company. So this is where the spill kits are. This is where the ERT team is, etc. So it's very important that when you're doing your chemical training, that you're getting both of those sides. You're getting the general chemical awareness, but also it has to be local. And particularly based on, at this point, based on what are the conclusions we came to when we did our chemical risk assessments? But what are the learnings that from there? And it can be, like, again, if you're starting from nothing, you have your standard chemical awareness training, but also then, like any health and safety, it can be just your toolbox talks. So we introduce a new chemical to this department tomorrow, and it happens to be corrosive, and we haven't had a corrosive here before. We can have a wee toolbox talk around that. They've all had general chemical awareness training, but we can have a toolbox talk around the fact that, okay, this one is a corrosive now. We've introduced a new type of glove. That's the blue glove that you guys see up there. When do we use this, etc., etc. So again, we keep training. It's not good enough that we just have it on a document and made available. We have to keep training and keep letting people know what the hazards are and what you do about them in our company. And again, who are the people? Again, training relevant to what your job is. So, if you're working out in the manufacturing area and you're never going near the laboratory, you don't need lab safety training. You need to be training on the bulk chemicals you use. So you're trained according to your role and according to the organization. So now that we've got here, and again, this seems like an obvious thing to put here, but going back to what I've said numerous times, this is based on mistakes that we've seen. And one of the mistakes I've seen in so many companies is where chemical safety is done as a project. It's a one-off project. So and very often maybe somebody gets a consultant in to help with them. And we say we did chemical safety 2 years ago, i.e. we got all the safe data sheets. We wrote our chemical risk assessments or our IOSH assessments or our HAZOPs, whatever the assessment, whatever we got, we wrote all them, we trained people 2 years ago. And then nobody touches it for another 2 years. And of course, your safe data sheets go out of date. Your assessments go out of date. New chemicals come in and they're not looked at. So essentially, with your safe data sheets, first of all, put some processes in place so that any safe data sheets you have, we keep up to date, that this is still the latest one. So whether we go back to manufacturers once every 12 months and we check, is that still the latest one? And again, like your old SAS management, like getting them day one, ideally you do that centrally. We archive the old ones. So again, I see that mistake where we get in a new safe strategy for WD-40 and we chuck that into the folder online. But when you go and look in the folder online, there's 4 different safe strategies now for WD-40. Only give your staff access to the relevant one. You need to keep the old revisions, so they need to be kept, but you only give your staff access to the latest one. So there's never any confusion. They only have access to the latest and the most relevant one. The same then with your risk assessments. So when do I need to update my risk assessments? Again, like any other risk assessment, it is you set a review date. A lot of companies go with 12, 18, 24 months. But before you hit that review date, if the safe data sheet gets updated, or again, like any assessment, if the process gets updated, you need to go and review the assessment. And again, you put something in place for that. You're not just coming back to everything in 2 years' time, because then you're starting from scratch again. You're starting from scratch, and it's a big project again, rather than doing a small bit over and over again to keep it up to date. And the last step then on keeping it up to date is procurement. It is looking out for your new chemicals coming in. And again, it's going right back to my very first point, to build your inventory. That has got to fall to the people in the individual departments. You as a health and safety manager, health and safety team person, you can't be expected to be down in engineering the day a new chemical comes in and see that it's there. And where I see this falling down sometimes is, and it depends on where you are in your organization right now. If you're starting from a low base, from the point of view of getting buy-in from your staff, well, you can't jump straight in and say to your staff, okay, when you're buying a new chemical, I want you to fill out this 3-page form, and I want you to get the safe data sheet, and then you write the risk assessment, and then you can bring in the new chemical. And that's not going to work because they're used to doing nothing. So if they're doing nothing, your starting point is, if you buy a new chemical, well, just tell me about it. Just tell me. Get it onto the list. Because if it's not on the list, we don't know there's a gap. And if we get them used to that, the ideal way to do it, and we have a module in Equal9 Chemical Manager for this, is that rather than them just buying a new chemical and starting using it, you move towards, they ask, I want to start using this new chemical. These are the hazards. This is how I'm going to use it. We put some controls in place, and then we start using it. That's the ideal world, but you can't jump from 0 to there. So your first point is, if you're starting from a low base, and if you're going out on the floor and you're finding chemicals and you're saying, I never knew we had that, make it as easy as possible for them to just tell you that they have it. Just tell you have it. And again, you're looking for the very same thing. When I talk about the hazards, when a new chemical comes in, you're trying to, well, do we need it at all? Is there a less hazardous one we can do? Can we buy a smaller size container? So again, procurement, they're always going to look to buy, maybe 1,000 liters. They can get a better price. But from a health and safety point of view, storing 1,000 liters is a heck of a lot more dangerous than storing 100 liters. And we might have to pay a bit more to buy 100 liters at a time, but the risks to the company and to our staff are a lot smaller. So again, health and safety has to be part of the decision when we're buying in a new chemical. That's pretty much it for me. We're just going to go into, I talked there about the approval process. That's essentially the difference between asking for a new chemical and telling someone that I have it, i.e. looking for approval. I kind of talked about that. Essentially, in an ideal world, we get the safe data sheet first, but that is really the absolute ideal world that you're looking for at the very end. And I said that there is a process on Chemical Manager for that. Just in terms of Equal9, how we help with this, we have a number of different products for health and safety, for e-learning, for environment. I'm involved in the Chemical Manager side of it. And essentially, what is Chemical Manager? It's an online chemical safety management system, but it is built on the back of an SDS management service. You give us the list of products you have, broken down by site, department, etc. We'll import all those. We'll source the safe data sheets for them. We'll take a lot of information off the safe data sheet and we'll put it into the system for you. So the first day you start using the system, you will have that snapshot of your hazards. You'll have all the safe data sheets attached, and you'll be able to build your custom template and push on then to start writing your risk assessments. So I'm just conscious of time. I've probably ran over a little bit on what I wanted to talk about. And I know one of you guys were going to jump in now and maybe work me on the Q&A on any questions that have come in on the chat.
Thank you very much. Indeed, a very comprehensive presentation. We have a couple of questions from the members. Okay, the first question is, what is the international chemical classification, labeling, and packaging rules?
Okay, so internationally, the vast majority of territories now follow what's called GHS. It stands for Global Harmonization. Before GHS, there was different regulations in different territories. So, for example, and I have it here in the UK, you'd see these. I don't know if you can see that, these old orange symbols, etc. So GHS is a UN standard. It's not a regulation; it's a UN standard. And then that's essentially what brings us these. So you can see these, you probably can't see it with the light, but you can see your red pictograms, your hazard statements, your precautions. So that's a UN standard that applies worldwide. You then have different regulations in different countries that make that law. So in Europe, it's REACH and CLP that make that law. In the UK after Brexit, they have their own. They have essentially GB, REACH, and GB CLP. In the US, etc. There are different territories, but essentially it's all based on the UN's GHS standard.
Thank you. We have another question. What will be the validity for the SDS documents in GCC region?
So sorry, say it again. What will be the
validity for the SDS documents?
What would be the validity? So, like, I'm not really sure exactly what's been asked, but your SDS, your safe data sheet, is your first point of finding out what the hazards I have. So it is the first document that you have to go to find out the hazards you have. You'll also find you'll have a label on the product that comes in itself, but the safe data sheet is the primary document to go to. If you're in a country where, like, and again, I have to excuse I don't have huge amount of experience in the Middle East. I know a lot of countries in the Middle East, or a lot of maybe companies in the Middle East that are maybe US companies or maybe European companies. They very often use US or European safe data sheets, but with GHS, they're all going to look very much the same anyway, regardless of which regulation. And that is the great thing about GHS. What I would say is, whichever country you're getting it from, so whether it's a US safe data sheet or a European one, ideally it has to be one from your own territory, and that's what it has to be by right. But at the very least, it has to be in a language that your staff can read, and that is important. Whatever language you're getting it in, it has to be something that your staff can read.
Thank you. Could you please tell us why welding rod is not considered as a potential hazard until it is used during the process?
Because so like this is one that comes up with our system a lot. Like a welding rod itself is not hazardous. It is not a hazardous chemical, in the same way that like a sheet of plywood is not considered to be a hazardous chemical. But if you get a sheet of plywood and you go at it with a planer, the dust that comes off it is hazardous. So essentially, the byproduct from it is hazardous. It often happens in the chemical industry. So if I take two chemicals and I mix them together, there's two things that can happen. The chemicals themselves can just blend, and what I get is essentially a mix of the two chemicals, or the chemicals can react. And when the chemicals react, A plus B can become C, which is a completely different thing. And the hazards of that third party chemical, or that third chemical, can be wildly different from the two. So and that's essentially what's happening with the welding rod. When you take a welding rod and you use it, you're essentially causing a chemical reaction, and the fumes that you're getting are a third party hazard. So basically, the fumes that you get from that welding rod are the hazards of those are completely different from the actual welding rod itself.
Thank you. Do we need to have SDS and risk assessment for petrol or diesel?
Definitely, absolutely, definitely. You should. Both are chemical products, and you should have a safe data sheet for both, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Could you please tell us about separating M-compatible chemicals?
Look, it's a whole it's a whole look, it's a whole webinar on its own. It's a whole even set of training on its own. What I can do is I have a table that I know we use the company ourselves that can be used as a guide in terms of which classes need to be separated from each other. But it's something that it's something that can't be automated, because you'll find that guide will work for, okay, you keep class 5, and probably the numbers wrong here, 5.1 oxidizers away from class 3 flammables, and that's a black and white. But you also have to then look at some of the minute details. So like, for example, acids and bases, which you're only going to get from looking maybe at section 9 of the SDS and get the pH level to see which is which. So I know we have some guidance in the company that, and I'll see if we can maybe dig that out and maybe be able to pass it on to you guys. Or I know we've even done some webinars on it in the past, just on segregation, and I may be able to maybe pass a link on to you guys. So after this, I'll do a bit of a look up and see, can I get some stuff together that we can pass on to you guys afterwards.
Thank you. We have one more question. What is the best way to detect chemical vapors?
That, and I just be honest, that would not be my area of expertise, and it is
okay.
Like, yeah, okay. It just, but it's you're getting into the whole area of industrial hygiene, which even within chemical safety is a specialist area. Industrial hygiene is a specialist area even within that, and it wouldn't be my thing. But I would say if you talk to an industrial hygienist, they would be the kind of person that would be able to answer that question for you.
Thank you. We have last but not least, how often do we have to train staff on chemical handling, or it's better we get skill identified personals? Again,
it's like any training. It's like any training in that, like the absolute must-have is if the safe data sheet changes, if the process changes, well then obviously you must change on the change of process. But again, it's always good to keep your eye in, to be down there to see, but okay, I've trained them how to do it. Are they doing it? And if it's not being done, well then, okay, we need another little refresher. We need another little refresher. Obviously, the other thing you take into account in terms of practice is how we change of personnel, etc. But it's like any other training. If the process changes, if the ingredients of the process, which is the chemical, maybe the machine, the people involved change, well then you need to change. You need to train up based on those changes.
Thank you very much. We have one more question. Can chemical policy be merged with environmental policy?
And again, this is very much an opinion, okay? But I would strongly, so I would say yes, it definitely can be, and I would say strongly it should be, because it's going to be a part of, you know, using your chemicals. The chemicals used are going to have an influence on your environmental policy. So I would say it can be, and I would say it should be. Like the both are closely linked.
Thank you very much. We have many questions, but due to lack of time, we may not be able to take all the questions. Syed, I request you to take the mic, and the show is yours. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Syed, are you there? Catherine?
Yeah, I think if we've had the presentation, if we'd like to thank you, Dermot, very much for that. And the slides and recording will be available in the next couple of weeks. And thank you very much for joining us, everybody. And thank you very much for the presentation, Dermot.
Cool. Thanks very much. And thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And see everybody at the next UAE presentation. Thank you.